Morning struggles. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but David Chen was already awake. He had been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, his mind racing through the day's responsibilities. At 31, David had learned to function on minimal sleep, a skill that had become essential since he became a single father 3 years ago. He quietly slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen of their small 2-bedroom apartment. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he prepared for another day of juggling multiple jobs and parenting duties. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Patterson's television already blaring the morning news next door. "Daddy?" Sophie's small voice called from the bedroom she shared with her twin sister. "Grace." David's heart clenched as he heard the uncertainty in her tone. Even at 4 years old, Sophie possessed an intuition that seemed far beyond her years, a byproduct of the medical challenges she had faced early in life. "I'm here, sweetheart," David whispered, entering the girl's room. Sophie sat up in her bed, her dark curls messy from sleep, while Grace continued to snore softly in the adjacent bed. The room was cramped but carefully organized, with their few toys neatly arranged on a small shelf David had built himself. Sophie reached her arms up. David scooped her into a gentle hug. She felt so small and fragile in his arms, though her recent medical reports had been encouraging. The leukemia that had nearly claimed her life was now in remission, but the financial and emotional scars remained fresh. "Bad dream?" David asked. Settling into the rocking chair that had belonged to his own mother, Sophie nodded against his chest. The scary lady was back.
Ow.
David's stomach tightened. Sophie had been having nightmares about her mother's abandonment, though she couldn't quite understand or articulate what had happened. In her dreams, a faceless woman would appear and disappear, leaving her feeling confused and frightened. "Remember what we talked about?" David said gently. "Dreams can't hurt you, and Daddy is always here to protect you." As Sophie's breathing steadied, David gazed around their modest home. The apartment was small but clean, filled with the warmth that came from people who genuinely cared for each other. Photos of happier times were noticeably absent from the walls, placed by the girls' artwork and school certificates. The daily routine. Helen Rodriguez arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. She had every morning for the past 3 years. At 68, David's former neighbor had become an unexpected lifeline when his world collapsed. After her own husband passed away, Helen had channeled her grief into helping David raise the twins, becoming the grandmother figure they desperately needed. "Good morning, my angels," Helen called softly as she entered with her key. Grace immediately bounced out of bed at the sound of Helen's voice, while Sophie remained cuddled against David's chest. "Abuela Helen," Grace exclaimed, using the Spanish term of endearment Helen had taught them. "Can we make pancakes today?" Helen smiled, though David noticed the weariness in her eyes. She had been dealing with her own health issues lately, though she rarely complained. "Of course, little one. But first, let's get you both ready for preschool." David watched as Helen effortlessly managed the morning chaos, helping the girls brush their teeth, comb their hair, and choose their clothes. Her presence allowed him to grab a quick shower before his first job of the day, as he stood under the lukewarm water. David reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. 3 years ago, he had been an optimistic young father with a beautiful wife and healthy twin daughters. He had worked as a computer technician, earning enough to support his family, while Jessica pursued her business degree. Then came Sophie's diagnosis, and everything unraveled with devastating speed. The weight of responsibility by 7:30 a.m. David was dressed in his maintenance uniform, ready for his shift at the downtown office complex. The work was physically demanding, but provided steady income and health insurance, both essential for his family's survival. "Daddy has to go to work now," he told the girls as they finished their breakfast. "But Abuela Helen will take you to school, and I'll pick you up this afternoon." Sophie clung to his leg, her eyes filled with the separation anxiety that had developed after her mother's abandonment. "Will you come back?" she asked, a question that broke David's heart every time he heard it. "I will always come back, David," promised, kneeling to her level. "Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." Grace, more resilient by nature, gave him a quick hug before returning to her coloring book. Bye, Daddy. Don't forget we have the school play next week. David's chest tightened as he realized he would have to request time off from both jobs to attend the play. Every decision required careful calculation, balancing his children's needs with the harsh realities of their financial situation. Memories of betrayal during his lunch break. David sat in his truck outside the office building, eating a peanut butter sandwich and thinking about the past. Jessica had been the love of his life, or so he had believed. They had met in college, bonded over their shared dreams of building a successful life together. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but they had embraced the idea of starting a family. When the ultrasound revealed twins, they were overjoyed. Had seemed genuinely excited about motherhood, spending hours decorating the nursery and reading parenting books. The first year had been challenging, but manageable. Both girls were healthy, and Jessica had returned to school part-time while David worked. They had struggled financially, but they were together, and that had felt like enough. Then came the blood tests. The concerned looks from doctors and the devastating diagnosis that changed everything. David still remembered the moment Jessica had walked out of their lives. He had returned from Sophie's first chemotherapy session to find a note on the kitchen table and half-empty closets. No explanation, no goodbye to the children, no forwarding address. The note had been brutally simple. I can't do this anymore. I'm not strong enough to watch everything fall apart. Take care of them. Building a new life, Helen's car pulled up outside the office building at 3 p.m., right on schedule. David waved to the girls through the window before climbing into the passenger seat. His second job at the grocery store didn't start until 6 p.m., giving him a few precious hours with his daughters. How was school today? Asked as they drove. Home. We learned about butterflies, Grace announced excitedly. They start as caterpillars and then they change into something beautiful. Sophie remained quiet, still processing the day's events. She had always been more introspective than her sister, perhaps due to her early medical experiences. David made a mental note to spend some one-on-one time with her that evening. Back at the apartment, David helped with homework while Helen prepared dinner. These domestic moments felt both precious and fragile, as if they could be disrupted at any moment. The girls seemed to sense this underlying tension, occasionally asking questions about their mother that David struggled to answer honestly. "Where is Mommy?" Sophie had asked just last week. "Sometimes grown-ups have to go away," David had replied, hating the inadequacy of his words. "But that doesn't mean it's your fault, and it doesn't mean you're not loved." Evening reflections. After tucking the girls into bed, David sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and his laptop. The medical debt from Sophie's treatment continued to mount despite the hospital's payment plan. His credit had been destroyed, making it impossible to find better housing or transportation. Helen joined him at the table, her expression troubled. "David, we need to talk about something." His stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" "I've been having some health issues," Helen admitted reluctantly. "The doctor wants to run more tests, and I may need to reduce my hours helping with the girls." David felt the familiar panic rising in his chest. Helen's assistance had been the foundation that allowed him to work multiple jobs while ensuring the girls received proper care. Without her, his carefully constructed life would collapse. "We'll figure it out," he said, though he had no idea how. "You focus on taking care of yourself. The girls and I will manage." Helen reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're a good father, David. Those girls are lucky to have you." As David prepared for bed that night, he stood in the doorway of the girls' room, watching them sleep peacefully. Sophie's hair had grown back thick and healthy, and both girls showed no signs of the trauma that had shaped their early years. They were resilient, adaptable, and filled with the kind of pure joy that only children possess. He had built a life for them from nothing, creating stability and love in the aftermath of abandonment. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. David had no way of knowing that tomorrow would bring a knock on their door that would threaten to destroy everything he had fought so hard to build. The woman who had walked away from their family was about to return, and she would bring with her the power to change their lives forever. As he finally drifted off to sleep, David's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for the family he had managed to preserve, unaware that their greatest challenge was just beginning. The unexpected visitor, the knock on the door, came at exactly 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Just as David was preparing to leave for work, it was sharp, authoritative, and somehow different from the usual visits from neighbors or delivery drivers. Grace was already dressed for school, chattering excitedly about a field trip. While Sophie sat quietly at the kitchen table, picking at her cereal, Helen looked up from packing the girls' lunchboxes, her weathered face showing concern. "Are you expecting someone?" David shook his head, moving toward the door with a caution that had become second nature. Through the peephole, he saw a woman in an expensive business suit, her posture radiating confidence and authority. Behind her stood a man in a dark suit, clearly her legal counsel. When David opened the door, his world tilted on its axis. "Hello, David," Jessica Martinez said, her voice carrying none of the warmth he remembered from their marriage. She looked dramatically different from the woman who had fled 3 years ago. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob, her makeup was professionally applied, and her clothing screamed wealth and success. "Jessica," David breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. The girls' chatter in the background suddenly seemed amplified, a reminder of everything at stake. "I prefer Ms. Martinez now," she replied coolly. "May I come in? We have important matters to discuss." David's protective instincts flared. "The girls are here. They're getting ready for school." "Perfect," Jessica said, stepping past him without invitation. "I'd like to see my daughters." The man behind her introduced himself as Robert Sterling, attorney at law, specializing in family court cases. His presence made David's stomach churn with anxiety. The confrontation, Grace looked up from her cereal bowl with curious eyes as the strangers entered their small living room. Sophie, more intuitive to emotional undercurrents, immediately moved closer to Helen, seeking comfort from the woman who had become her anchor. "Girls," Jessica said, her voice taking on an artificially sweet tone, "do you know who I am?" Grace tilted her head, studying the elegant woman with the intensity of a 4-year-old trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you the lady from Daddy's pictures?" David's heart clenched. He had removed most photos of Jessica from their home, but a few remained hidden in drawers, occasionally discovered by curious little hands. "I'm your mother," Jessica announced, as if revealing a wonderful surprise. "I've been away working very hard to build a better life for you." Sophie's grip on Helen's hand tightened. "I don't remember you," she said with the brutal honesty of childhood. Jessica's composed mask flickered for just a moment. "You were very young when I left, but I'm here now, and I have so much to offer you." David stepped forward, his body instinctively positioning itself between Jessica and the girls. "Helen, could you please take the girls to school? I think they've heard enough." "Of course," Helen said, her voice steady despite the tension filling the room. "Come on, my angels. Let's get your backpacks." As Helen ushered the confused girls out of the apartment, Sophie looked back over her shoulder. "Daddy, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," David lied, forcing a smile. "I'll see you after school." The ultimate wants the girls. "We're gone." Jessica's demeanor shifted completely. The artificial sweetness vanished, replaced by cold calculation. She surveyed their modest apartment with undisguised disdain, her eyes cataloging every sign of their financial struggles. 3 years, David," she said, settling onto their worn couch as if it might contaminate her expensive suit. 3 years. Of this poverty, this limitation, this ... mediocrity. "This is their home," David replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're happy here, they're loved." Jessica laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Love doesn't pay for private schools, David. It doesn't secure their future or provide them with opportunities." Attorney Sterling opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Ms. Martinez has built a considerable fortune since leaving Seattle. Her technology company, Quantum Solutions, is valued at over $50 million. David felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you want, Jessica?" "Want my daughters back?" she stated simply. "I can provide them with everything you can't. Private education, healthcare, travel, cultural experiences. They'll want for nothing. Except their father," David said, his voice breaking slightly. "Except the man who held them through nightmares, who worked 3 jobs to pay for Sophie's cancer treatment, who never once considered abandoning them. Jessica's eyes hardened. Abandonment is a harsh word. I prefer to think of it as strategic retreat. I needed time to build something substantial, something that could truly benefit them. Sterling placed legal documents on the coffee table. We're filing for full custody, Mr. Chen. Ms. Martinez can demonstrate superior financial stability, educational opportunities, and long-term security. The investigation, David stared at the papers, the legal jargon swimming before his eyes. Left when Sophie was dying. You walked away when she needed you most. I left when I realized I couldn't help her by staying, Jessica countered. Every day I remained was another day watching our lives fall apart. I chose to build something better. You chose yourself, David shot back. You chose the easy path. Jessica stood, smoothing her skirt. The easy path. You think building a multi-million-dollar company was easy? You think clawing my way to the top of a male-dominated industry was simple? I think you're a coward, David said quietly. I think you ran away from the hard parts of life and now you want to waltz back in and claim credit for children you've never bothered to know. Sterling cleared his throat. Mr. Chen, we're prepared to offer you generous visitation rights. Every other weekend, holidays, summer vacation. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Adversarial. David laughed bitterly. You want to take my children away from the only stable home they've ever known? And you think this isn't adversarial? Jessica moved toward the door. You have 48 hours to consider our offer. You can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, I'm getting my daughters back. The legal battle begins after Jessica and her attorney left. David sat in his empty apartment, staring at the legal documents that threatened to destroy his world. The custody petition was thorough, painting him as an unfit father struggling with poverty while positioning Jessica as a successful businesswoman, is capable of providing superior opportunities. His phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Girls are at school, coming back to talk. When Helen returned, she found David at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. She's going to take them, he said without looking up. Look at this place, Helen. Look at what I can offer them. How can I compete with millions of dollars? Helen sat beside him, her presence a comfort in the chaos. Money isn't everything, David. Those girls know who loves them. Will that matter in court? David asked desperately. Will a judge care about bedtime stories and scraped knees when Jessica can offer them Harvard educations? We need to fight, Helen said firmly. We need to show the court what kind of mother abandons her children during a medical crisis. David looked at the legal documents again, noting the attorney's credentials and the law firm's prestigious address. I can't afford to fight this. I can barely afford groceries. Then we'll find a way, Helen said. There are lawyers who work pro bono, legal aid societies. We'll figure it out. The community response word of Jessica's return spread quickly through their small neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped by with a casserole and moral support. The teachers at the girls' preschool expressed concern about the potential upheaval. Even David's co-workers at the office complex offered to help however they could. Those kids belong with you, said Thomas, David's supervisor at the maintenance job. Everyone can see how much you love them. David met with a legal aid attorney, Maria Santos, who agreed to take his case. She was young, overworked, and facing an uphill battle against Jessica's high-powered legal team, but she was determined to fight for what was right. The court will consider the best interests of the children, Maria explained during their first meeting. Stability, emotional bonds, and continuity of care all matter. The fact that you've been their primary caregiver for 3 years carries significant weight. But what about her money? David asked. What about everything she can provide? Financial resources are just one factor, Maria assured him. The court will look at the whole picture. The girls' confusion, Sophie and Grace began showing signs of stress as the legal proceedings intensified. Sophie's nightmares returned, and Grace became clingy and anxious. They couldn't understand why their peaceful world was suddenly filled with lawyers and court dates. Daddy, Sophie asked one evening as David tucked her into bed, are you going to leave us too? The question hit David like a physical blow. Never, he said firmly, pulling her into a tight hug. I will never leave you, Sophie. No matter what happens, I will always be your daddy. Grace, overhearing from her bed, added, But what about the pretty lady? She says she's our mommy. David chose his words carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sweetheart, men. Sometimes they leave when they should stay, and sometimes they come back when it's too late. The revelation as the court date approached, Maria Santos made a discovery that would change everything. While investigating Jessica's claims about her business success, she uncovered irregularities in the financial records. Quantum solutions existed, but Jessica's role in its creation was vastly exaggerated. She didn't build the company, Maria explained to David during a late-night phone call. She married the founder, Trevor Martinez, 6 months after leaving Seattle. When they divorced last year, she received a substantial settlement. But she's not the self-made millionaire she claims to be. David felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. So she abandoned us for another man? It appears so, Maria confirmed. And according to the divorce records, Trevor Martinez cited Jessica's inability to bond with his children from a previous marriage, a contributing factor to their divorce. The revelation painted a clear picture of Jessica's character. Hadn't left to build a better life for her daughters, she had left to escape the responsibilities of motherhood entirely. Her return wasn't motivated by love or regret, but by a desire to present herself as a devoted mother to improve her public image. The preparation as the custody hearing approached, David's community rallied around him. Helen, despite her own health challenges, worked tirelessly to document every aspect of the girls' lives under David's care. Medical records, school reports, and testimonials from teachers and neighbors all painted a picture of a devoted father who had sacrificed everything for his daughters. Sophie's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Moore, agreed to testify about David's dedication during the most difficult period of his daughter's life. I've seen many families face childhood cancer. She would later tell the court, Mr. Chen never missed an appointment, never failed to ask the right questions, and never let his daughter see his own fear. The preschool teachers documented the girls' emotional well-being, noting their secure attachment to David and their obvious distress when separated from him. Even Mrs. Patterson, now 83 and using a walker, insisted on testifying about the loving home David had created. The final preparation, the night before the hearing, David sat with both girls on the couch, reading their favorite bedtime story. Sophie had chosen The Runaway Bunny, a tale about a mother's unconditional love, while Grace preferred Goodnight Moon, finding comfort in its predictable rhythm. Daddy, Sophie said as he closed the book. Are you scared? David considered. Lying, but these girls had been through too much to be deceived. A little, he admitted, but I'm not scared of loving you or taking care of you. I'm only scared of not being able to. Grace climbed onto his lap. Will you always be our daddy? Always, David promised, meaning every word, no matter what happens. Tomorrow, I will always be your daddy, and you will always be my girls. As he tucked them into bed, David realized that regardless of the court's decision, he had already won the most important battle. He had kept his family together through the worst of times, and he had raised 2 incredible little girls who knew they were loved. The morning would bring judgment. But tonight, his world was complete. The courtroom, the King County Family Court, was an imposing building that seemed designed to intimidate rather than comfort. David arrived early, wearing his only suit, secondhand purchase from 3 years ago that he'd worn 2 job interviews and Sophie's medical consultations. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened his tie, aware that this single day would determine his daughter's future. Jessica sat across the courtroom aisle, flanked by her legal team. She wore a navy blue designer suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. Her appearance carefully calculated to project maternal responsibility and financial stability. She looked like she belonged in this formal setting, while David felt like an imposter in his own life. Judge Patricia Wells entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who had seen every possible family crisis. At 58, she had presided over thousands of custody cases, developing a reputation for fairness and a keen ability to see through facades to the truth beneath it. This is the matter of Martinez versus Chen, regarding custody of minor children. Sophie and Grace Chen, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of ultimate authority. I've reviewed the preliminary filings, and I understand we have some complex circumstances to address. Maria Santos, David's legal aid attorney, stood beside him with a confidence that belied her young age. She had worked tirelessly to prepare their case, driven by a personal conviction that justice should not be determined by wealth alone. The opening statements, Robert Sterling, Jessica's attorney, spoke first with the polished eloquence of someone accustomed to winning. Your Honor, this case represents a classic example of changed circumstances. 3 years ago, my client made the difficult decision to leave an untenable situation in order to build a better future for her daughters. Today, she returns as a successful businesswoman, capable of providing opportunities that their father simply cannot match. He presented a compelling narrative of Jessica's transformation from struggling young mother to successful entrepreneur. Financial statements, business portfolios, and educational plans painted a picture of limitless possibilities for Sophie and Grace. Ms. Martinez can offer her daughters private education at Seattle Academy, comprehensive health care, cultural enrichment, and financial security. She has established trust funds worth $5 million each, ensuring their future regardless of circumstances. Maria Santos rose to respond, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the challenge. Your Honor, this case isn't about money. It's about love, stability, and the fundamental question of what's truly in the best interest of these children. Painted a different picture entirely, one of a devoted father who had never wavered in his commitment to his daughters. When Sophie was diagnosed with leukemia at 18 months old, Jessica Martinez abandoned her family. She left a note and disappeared, leaving Mr. Chen to navigate the most terrifying period of any parent's life entirely alone. The testimonies begin. Dar. Patricia Moore took the stand first, her credentials as Sophie's oncologist lending weight to her words. I've treated hundreds of children with leukemia, and I can tell you that family support is crucial to recovery. Mr. Chen never missed an appointment, never failed to ask the right questions, and never let his daughter see his own fear. She described the long nights in the hospital, the complex treatment protocols, and the financial sacrifices David had made to ensure Sophie received the best possible care. When other parents would break down or need time away, Mr. Chen remained steadfast. He learned to administer medications, recognize symptoms, and provide comfort during the most difficult moments. Sterling's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. Doctor, wouldn't you agree that superior financial resources could have made this process easier for everyone involved? It can't buy the kind of dedication I witnessed from Mr. Chen. Sophie's recovery wasn't just about medical treatment. It was about feeling safe and loved throughout the process. Helen Rodriguez took the stand next, her testimony the most emotionally powerful of the day. Despite her own health challenges, she spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed David's transformation from devastated husband to devoted single father. I've been helping raise those girls for 3 years, she said, her voice strong. Despite her frail appearance, I've seen David work 3 jobs to pay for Sophie's medical bills. I've watched him give up everything for himself to ensure they had what they needed. She described the daily routines, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees and hurt feelings that David had navigated alone. Those girls don't know their mother. They know their father, and they know that he has never let them down. The social workers report. Amanda Foster, the court-appointed social worker, presented her findings with clinical objectivity. She had spent weeks observing both households, interviewing the children, and assessing the emotional dynamics at play. My primary concern is the children's attachment patterns, she testified. Sophie and Grace demonstrate secure attachment to their father and their caregiver, Mrs. Rodriguez. They show appropriate developmental milestones and emotional regulation. She described her visit to Jessica's luxurious apartment, noting the obvious wealth but also the clinical coldness. The children seemed uncomfortable in that environment. They clung to their father and showed signs of stress when separated from him. Her report documented the girls' confusion about Jessica's identity, her inability to form any emotional connection with her, and their clear preference for their familiar environment. While Ms. Martinez can certainly provide material advantages, the children's emotional needs are being met in their current situation. Sterling challenged her findings, suggesting that the children's initial discomfort was natural and would fade with time. Isn't it possible that given proper adjustment period, the children would benefit from their mother's resources and attention? Possible, Amanda conceded, but not necessarily probable. Attachment theory suggests that disrupting established bonds can cause significant psychological damage, particularly in children who have already experienced abandonment. The children's voices. Judge Wells made the unusual decision to speak with Sophie and Grace privately in her chambers. At 4 years old, they were young for such interviews, but their voices needed to be heard. Sophie, ever the more serious twin, spoke with surprising clarity. "I don't remember the pretty lady," she told the judge. "Daddy takes care of us. Reads stories and makes breakfast, and hugs us when we're scared." Grace, more animated, described their daily routines with David and Helen. "Daddy works really hard, and sometimes he's tired, but he always comes home. He promised he would never leave us." When asked about Jessica, both girls showed confusion and discomfort. "She's a stranger," Sophie said simply. "She smells different and talks different, and she doesn't know about my medicine or Grace's stuffed elephant." The judge asked gentle questions about their home, their friends, their school. The girls painted a picture of a life that was modest but rich in love and stability. Jessica's testimony. Jessica took the stand with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardroom presentations. She spoke eloquently about her business success, her financial capabilities, and her desire to provide for her daughters. "I made a difficult choice 3 years ago," she testified. "I recognized that I couldn't help my family by staying in a situation that was spiraling toward financial ruin. I chose to build something better." She described her rise to wealth, her marriage to Trevor Martinez, and her divorce settlement. "I now have the resources to give Sophie and Grace everything they deserve. Private education, travel, cultural experiences, financial security." But Maria Santos' cross-examination revealed the cracks in Jessica's polished facade. "Ms. Martinez, you mentioned building something better. Can you tell the court about your role in founding Quantum Solutions?" Jessica's composure faltered slightly. "I was instrumental in the company's development." "But you didn't actually found the company, did you? You married the founder 6 months after leaving your daughters?" "I contributed significantly to the company's growth," Jessica insisted. "And when you divorced Mr. Martinez, his attorney cited your inability to bond with his children as a contributing factor, correct?" Jessica's face flushed with anger. "That's taken out of context, is it? You left your biological children when they needed you most, and you couldn't form relationships with your stepchildren either. What makes you think you can suddenly become a mother now?" David's testimony was the most emotionally charged moment of the entire proceeding. He spoke without notes, his words coming from the heart rather than legal preparation. 3 years ago, my world fell apart," he began. "Sophie was diagnosed with leukemia, and Jessica walked away. I had a choice to make. I could feel sorry for myself, or I could be the father my daughters needed." He described the long nights in the hospital, the fear and uncertainty, the financial struggles that had defined their lives. "I'm not rich. Can't offer them private schools or trust funds. But I can offer them something that money can't buy." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "I can offer them a father who has never missed a bedtime story, who held them through every nightmare, who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed and loved." Sterling's cross-examination was brutal, focusing on David's financial limitations and the modest circumstances of their home. "Mr. Chen, can you honestly say you're providing these children with the best possible life? And providing them with love," David replied. "I'm providing them with stability and security, and the knowledge that they are wanted and cherished. Maybe that's not the best money can buy, but it's the best I can give." Sterling's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal rhetoric. Painting Jessica as a prodigal mother who had returned to claim her rightful place in her daughters' lives, he emphasized the opportunities that wealth could provide, the security that financial stability offered, and the natural bond between mother and child. "The law recognizes the fundamental right of parents to raise their children," he argued. "Ms. Martinez has demonstrated her ability to provide superior care. and she deserves the opportunity to build relationships with her daughters. Maria Santos. Closing argument was simpler, but more powerful. Your Honor, this case asks us to define what makes a parent. Is it biology? Is it money? Or is it the daily act of showing up, of choosing your children over and over again, even when it's hard?
No.
Reminded the court of David's unwavering dedication, his sacrifice, and his love. Sophie and Grace don't need a stranger with money. They need their father, the man who has been their anchor through every storm. The verdict Judge Wells took a brief recess to consider her decision, leaving both sides to wait in tense anticipation. When she returned, her expression revealed nothing of her internal deliberations. This case presents a classic conflict between financial advantage and emotional stability, she began. The court must weigh the potential benefits of material wealth against the documented bonds of love and care. She addressed Jessica directly. Miss Martinez, your abandonment of these children during a medical crisis demonstrates a fundamental failure of parental responsibility. The court cannot ignore the fact that you chose to leave when your daughter was fighting for her life. Jessica's face paled, but the judge continued. Furthermore, your inability to form meaningful relationships with your stepchildren raises serious questions about your capacity for maternal bonding. Turning to David, Judge Wells' expression softened slightly. Mr. Chen, your devotion to your daughters is evident and admirable. You have created a stable, loving environment despite significant financial challenges. The courtroom held its breath as she delivered her final decision. The court finds that the best interests of Sophie and Grace Chen are served by remaining. In their current situation, custody is awarded to David Chen, with supervised visitation rights granted to Jessica Martinez. The aftermath, the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from David's supporters. Helen wept with relief, while Maria Santos smiled with the satisfaction of justice served. Jessica sat in stunned silence, her carefully constructed plans crumbling. Around her, outside the courthouse, David fell to his knees as Sophie and Grace ran into his arms. "Daddy," they cried in unison, their young voices filled with joy and relief. "I told you I would never leave you," David whispered, holding them close. "I told you we would always be together." Helen joined their embrace, her own tears mixing with theirs. "We're going home," she said softly. "We're all going home." The beautiful ending, 6 months later, David received a promotion at work finally, earning enough to move his family to a better apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it had 3 bedrooms and a small yard where the girls could play. Sophie's latest medical checkup showed no signs of cancer recurrence. She was thriving, her hair had grown back completely, and she was developing into a confident, compassionate little girl. Grace had started kindergarten and was already showing signs of academic excellence. Helen's health had stabilized with proper medical care, and she continued to be an integral part of their family. She had moved into the apartment next door, close enough to help, but far enough to give David space to grow as a single father. Jessica had requested 1 supervised visit, which took place in a neutral location with a court-appointed monitor. The girls were polite but distant, showing no interest in developing a relationship with her. She had not requested any additional visits. On a sunny Saturday morning, David sat in their small backyard, watching his daughters chase butterflies in the grass. Sophie had insisted on planting a small garden, and Grace had painted rocks to mark the different flowers. It was a modest paradise, but it was theirs. "Daddy," Sophie said, settling beside him on the old blanket they used for picnics. "Are you happy?" David looked around at their simple life, at the love that surrounded them despite their modest circumstances, at the family they had built from the ashes of abandonment and betrayal. "I'm the happiest man in the world," he said, meaning every word. Grace tumbled onto the blanket, grass stains on her knees and dirt under her fingernails. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" "Why not?" David laughed, scooping both girls into his arms. "We can do whatever we want. We're home." As the sun set over their little yard, David realized that they had everything they needed. Not everything they wanted, perhaps, but everything that mattered. Love, stability, security, the unbreakable bond of a family that had chosen each other over and over again. The woman who had abandoned them had returned with promises of wealth and opportunity, but she had lost the most precious gift of all: the daily joy of watching her daughters grow, the quiet moments of connection, and the deep satisfaction of unconditional love. David had won more than a custody battle. He had won the right to continue being the father his daughters needed, and in doing so, he had discovered that the richest life of all is one filled with love, laughter, and the simple pleasure of being together. The never-ending story of their family would continue, written not in courtrooms or legal documents, but in bedtime stories, scraped knees, birthday parties, and the countless small moments that make up a life well lived, and they all lived happily ever after. Not because their problems disappeared, but because they faced them together as a family, with love as their greatest strength and each other as their greatest treasure. The end.